On a freezing night in December of 1953, a 24-year-old man named Walter Crane stood alone in the dark lobby of a shuttered seaside hotel, holding a ring of keys and listening to a bell that should not have been ringing. The hotel was called the Hadley, and it was closed for the winter. Walter was the only living person inside it. And the little brass bell on the front desk, the one a guest taps to check in, was ringing all by itself. But to understand why that bell turned Walter's blood to ice, you have to go back to the day he took the job. Walter was a quiet, practical young man who had just come back from 2 years at sea, and he needed work for the winter. So when he saw an ad for a night watchman at the Hadley, a big resort hotel that shut down every winter, he took it without thinking twice. The pay was good and the work was simple. Walk the halls at night, make sure nothing froze or flooded or caught fire, and lock up behind you. The owner, an older man named Mr. Pell, walked Walter through the building on his first afternoon. And as they walked, Mr. Pell mentioned, almost as a joke, that the last few watchmen hadn't lasted very long. Walter asked why, and Mr. Pell kind of laughed and said, "Well, there's an old story about this place. According to the story, every year, on the longest night of winter, a guest checks into room 9. A guest no one ever sees arrive, and who is gone by morning. Decades earlier, one old watchman had sworn up and down that he'd seen it happen, that on the solstice the bell rang, the ledger signed itself, and room 9 was occupied. Everyone just figured the old man had been drinking. Eventually, he stopped showing up for work, and people forgot all about him. Walter, being a practical guy, didn't believe a word of it. It was a ghost story to scare off bored watchmen. He needed the money, so he took the keys. For the first few weeks, the job was exactly as boring as it sounded. Every night, Walter would start at the front desk, take the ring of keys, and walk the building floor by floor. He'd check the boiler, test the locks, look in on the empty kitchen, and listen to the wind coming off the water. The whole place was full of furniture hidden under white sheets, and at night, in the dark, they looked a little like people sitting very still. But Walter got used to it. He'd do his rounds, sit at the desk with a thermos and a paperback, and wait for the sun. And he never once went near room 9. Not because he believed the story, he just never had a reason to. Then came the night of December 21st, the longest night of the year. Walter was at the desk around 2 in the morning, half asleep over his book, when the little brass bell on the counter rang. One clear ring. He sat up. He was alone. There was no one at the desk, no one in the whole building but him, and yet the bell had rung. And when he looked down, the guest ledger, the one he kept closed in a locked drawer, was lying open in front of him, and a name was freshly signed into room 9 in wet black ink. Now, Walter's first thought was that someone had broken in, a prank, a squatter, somebody. So he did the sensible thing. He grabbed his flashlight and the ring of keys, and he went to go check room 9. He crossed the lobby, climbed the wide staircase, and turned down the second-floor corridor toward the 9. It was cold up there, colder than the rest of the building. His breath was fogging in the flashlight beam. He reached the door. The brass 9 was tarnished almost black, and right away he noticed a faint warm light coming from under it. Walter knocked. No answer. He called out that he was the watchman. Still nothing. So he put the key in the lock and turned it. But the door was already unlocked. It just swung open on its own. And Walter stepped inside. The room was warm, not cold like the hallway. Warm like someone had been sitting in there for hours. The bed was made, but there was a long depression in the covers, right in the middle, as if someone had just been lying there. There was a single leather suitcase standing at the foot of the bed, old, cracked, and tagged for a journey. And on the nightstand beside the lamp was a man's pocket watch, open, face up, still ticking. And when Walter touched it, it was warm. But there was no one in the room. Walter checked the bathroom, the closet behind the door, empty. And the one window was latched shut from the inside, painted shut even. Nobody had come or gone that way in years. Walter was standing there, trying to make sense of it, when his flashlight passed over the nightstand again, and he saw a photograph lying next to the watch. It was an old black and white photo, the kind with a white border. A picture of the hotel staff, lined up in front of the Hadley in their uniforms. Walter picked it up. On the back, in faded pencil, was a date. The summer of 1911. 1111 mind light into my more more what no ro right light one and someone had drawn a small ink circle around one of the men, the night watchman, standing at the end of the row. Walter brought the flashlight close to look at the circled man's face, and his stomach dropped. Because the man in the circle, the watchman from 1911, looked exactly like him. Same face, same build, down to the cleft in the chin. And then Walter looked back at the pocket watch. He turned it over, and engraved on the back were two initials, WC. Walter did not stay to figure it out. He grabbed the watch off the nightstand, turned, and walked very fast out of that room. Down the corridor, down the stairs, across the lobby, and he did not look back once. He sat at the front desk until the first gray light came up over the water, gripping that watch, telling himself there had to be an explanation. When Mr. Pell arrived in the morning, Walter told him all of it. The bell, the ledger, the warm room, the photograph, the face. And Mr. Pell just looked at him, the same way people had looked at that old watchman decades before, like Walter had lost his mind. Walter didn't argue. He set the keys down on the desk and said he was done. He went up to room 9 one last time with Mr. Pell to show him. But when they opened the door, it was just a cold, empty room. No suitcase, no photograph. The bed flat and made. The only proof Walter had that any of it happened was the pocket watch in his coat pocket. So he kept it, and he left, and he never went back to the Hadley. For a long time after that, Walter could not get that night out of his head. He told himself it was the cold and a tired mind, but he had held that warm watch in his hand. He had seen his own face in a photograph from 1911. So he started trying to explain it. He went to the town library and read everything he could find about the Hadley and about that old watchman who told the story first. And what he found was that the old watchman had never actually quit. One winter, he had simply vanished, walked into the hotel one night and was never seen again. But there was a closer problem, too. That same winter Walter worked there, a guest's belongings had gone missing from the hotel's storage, and a leather suitcase was on the list. Mr. Pell told the police the new watchman had quit suddenly and strangely, and for a while, Walter was terrified they'd decide he was a thief, or worse. But no charges ever came. The missing items were written off, the story faded, and slowly Walter let it go. He married. He became a school teacher in a town an hour inland. He had a good, quiet life. He just kept the watch in a drawer. And in nearly 30 years, that watch never once needed winding. And that's where it stayed, until the autumn of 1981. Walter was an old man by then, retired, and one morning reading the newspaper, he saw a small headline that stopped him cold. The Hadley Hotel, closed and rotting for years, was finally being torn down. Walter read the article twice, and then he set the paper down, and he just sat there. Because the article said that during the demolition, the crew had found something behind the second-floor wall. Bricked up, sealed inside the wall behind one of the guest rooms, they had found human remains. A man who had been there a very, very long time. And with the remains were a few belongings. An old, cracked leather suitcase, and an empty space where a pocket watch should have been. A few weeks later, there was a knock at Walter's door, and when he opened it, a police detective was standing on his porch. The detective said he was reopening a very old missing persons case tied to the Hadley, and that Walter's name had come up as the last man to work there. And then the detective took out a photograph the crew had found sealed in the wall with the remains, and asked Walter if he could help identify a man in it, and what Walter saw he could not believe. It was the same photograph, the hotel staff lined up in front of the Hadley in the summer of 1911. And there was the same small ink circle, around the same man at the end of the row, the night watchman. The detective pointed at the circled face and asked, "Do you know who this is?" And Walter looked down at a photograph taken 42 years before he was born, and he was looking at his own face. And in his coat that day, the same as he'd carried it for 30 years, was the watch. The watch engraved WC, the watch that belonged in the empty space beside the bricked-up bones. That night, for the first time in nearly 30 years, Walter took the watch out of the drawer and held it, and it had stopped. And in the quiet of his house, an hour inland from the sea, Walter Crane could have sworn he heard, very faint and very far away, the single clear ring of a front desk bell. Some guests, it seems, never really check out. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you think happened in the comments. And if you want another one, the next story is right here.